can see me okay. I am going to see if Gemma is online yet so I can invite her. Hi everyone. Oh, there's already so many people logged in. Brilliant. Aha, right, Gemma, I can see her, so if I know what I'm doing, fingers crossed this works, and Gemma should be joining us, so let's see what happens.
Hello.
Yay!
Hi. We're both here. It works.
Amazing.
My oldest son is very briefly, he's just opened the door. He's supposed to be asleep.
Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Hello, hi.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello. You should be in bed. I'm just about to. In fact, I'm doing an Insta Live right now, so you're going to have to go back to bed. Need anything, go and get Daddy. Yes, right now. Sorry.
The perfect way to begin an Instagram Live about raising kids. Amazing.
Oh, right. Anyway, that's my oldest son, Max.
Hello, Matt.
I'm just going to go shut the door. Hang on.
So I was actually going to say, I've just breastfed my baby for the second time. I also have very loud cats, so hopefully there won't be too many interruptions my end, but as you know what it's like when you've got kids, you've got cats and other animals, doesn't always go to plan, does it? So
no, it's fine. He's gone back to bed, and he is the subject of today's discussion.
Totally, that was a nice way to begin the live. I liked it. It was good.
It was fabulous. Oh, look,
How are you?
so many people. We've got 45 people so far. It's wonderful.
Is that amazing? Hi, everyone. Hello.
It's so nice to see you on here. This is, I think, the second live I've done. But I did one a long time ago, and this is an absolute honour to be with Sam because this is such an important topic. You know, Sam's a dietitian. She knows so much about this stuff. Obviously, it's a passion of mine as well. So I'm hoping that you guys are going to find this super interesting. And if you've got any questions while we're talking, you can always post them, and then we can do our best to answer them as well, can't we?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a question function at the bottom. And I think if I click on that, it will come up with any questions that you've asked for us. We'll obviously try and keep an eye on the comments as well. I don't know if you want to keep an eye on them as well, Gemma.
I'll try.
Can you see the question function as well at the bottom? Or is that just me?
No, I think everybody has that.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. Okay.
No,
so
I don't think there's any questions so far. There's lots of excited people.
Fine.
Fabulous.
Prior to today, I asked a few people if they could ask us some questions. So I thought what we do first is we would just introduce ourselves, and then we could start a couple of questions that have already been asked to help it go and help with the flow. And then if any more come up, we'll try and answer them as well. How's that sound?
Sounds fabulous, Sam. I love it.
So Gemma, tell us about yourself, so that I'm sure many people watching already know lots about you, but for those who might not know who you are, yeah, give us an intro.
Right. So my name is Dr. Gemma Newman. I am a GP. I've been a GP for many years now, and I'm a senior partner at a busy NHS general practice. I've got nearly 3,000 patients that I look after, and I am passionate about plant-based nutrition. I'm passionate about holistic health and planetary health, and combining those passions with helping my patients has been my life's work and something that I absolutely adore doing. And I'm very, very lucky to have two sons, one who is 8 and one who is 5. And my husband, myself, and my 2 children, we would all class ourselves as vegan or plant-based, and we can talk about the difference between those two things as well. But yeah, my big passion is to help people eat more plants and to help them feel happy. So if I can combine those interests with my work, then it's what I love to do.
That's awesome. That's
Tell
really
us about
good.
yourself, Sam.
Okay, Gemma, I will do. So what's great is Gemma's got some older children, whereas I've got a year-old baby. If any of you follow me who are watching, you'll know she's just celebrated her first birthday. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. As anyone here who's got kids who might be watching knows what it's like. The first year of having a baby is like, wow, big shock to the system. And I guess if you're vegan as well, there might be some extra concerns and anxieties about raising a baby vegan and being vegan yourself while breastfeeding or being pregnant. Um, so yeah, it's been really nice because all these years before I became pregnant, I thought, of course you can raise a child being vegan, but it's nice to actually do it and have that practical sort of knowledge, you know.
It makes a
I'm
big
also,
difference.
yeah, it does, it really does, because you can learn all these things, but actually when you're doing it yourself, it really puts that theory into practice. So yeah, it gives you a different insight, doesn't it? And I'm a pediatric dietitian, and I currently do community clinics. And I was in adults before I became a pediatric dietitian. So yeah, I'm just as Gemma is just really excited about veganism. I've been vegan for 13 years, and I just yeah, I love the fact that veganism is so accessible now, and there's so much information out there. And I just really hope this live serves as a really good source of information for all those people out there who are vegan, thinking about going vegan, want to go more plant based, that kind of thing. So yeah, here we are.
Here we are.
Here we
Oh,
are.
it's
Okay.
wonderful. It's really it's so exciting to see the movement growing as well. Um,
Yeah,
and people's
definitely.
interest. I think I've had so many questions about kids, and that's understandable because there are so many more people that wanted to go vegan now, and they want to make sure that they're doing it in the right way and getting any help that
Yeah,
they might need. So this is fantastic.
yeah, totally, totally. So I guess without further ado, should we crack on? Should we
Let's
have a go?
let's give it a
I,
whirl.
I I thought this question might be more something for you, Gemma. I thought we'd just get straight in there. It's a question about poo. Is that all right?
I love poo. I think most vegans adore poo. It's one of the things that we talk about most often.
So it was a question about what's normal in terms of poo. I'm just trying to find it here, actually. Let's have a little look. I should have got you do. I should have done my intro first, so while you're doing your intro, I could have got this question ready.
Well,
This
I
is my
can do.
first live, by the way, everyone. So,
Oh, don't worry,
I,
guys. There's a question here I can answer while Sam's looking.
oh,
Um,
amazing! Great, go for it.
so the question is, could you please give an update on plant-based nutrition and the adequate provision of essential amino acids? So basically, that's a relatively easy one from my perspective. All the essential amino acids can be found in plant foods and in various combinations of plant foods. It used to be thought years ago that you had to combine the plant foods at the same meal to get the amino acids, but that's just untrue, and it's been proven to be untrue. You can get every kind of amino acid from all plants, and you don't have to eat them all together at the same meal in order to get them. I think the only reason that you'd need to worry specifically about protein is if you weren't actually eating enough calories in general. So you're essentially either starving or having a calorie deficient diet, um,
Mhm.
or if you are elderly and you've got your thinning of the muscles, and or we call it sarcopenia, and sort of over the age of 65 and you're not necessarily eating enough, I think then that's probably more important to focus on your protein content specifically at those times. But as long as you're eating a nice variety of plant foods, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains and legumes, then you should get plenty of protein. I don't know, Sam, if you wanted to add something that's more specific around the topic of protein, because that's always the number one question. And I'm sure that you probably have perhaps a more nuanced approach given your background in dietetics.
Well, no, I'd say what you said is spot on. Especially what you said about eating enough calories, you will get enough protein, but obviously as long as those calories are from whole foods, because obviously if you ate all your calories in, say, ice cream or chips, you probably wouldn't meet your protein. Um, but yeah, again, like you said, it's a very outdated view in terms of having to have all your amino acids at every meal. However, it is a really good idea anyway to get into the practice of every mealtime having what I'd call a primary protein. So something like a legume, like a bean or a lentil or a soy product, nuts or seeds. So having that as part of your meal, as well as basing it on a starchy carbohydrate. So something like bread, pasta, rice, bulgur wheat, you know, all those types of things. Cereals, for instance. So yeah, it's absolutely perfectly easy to get all your protein needs on a plant-based diet. Absolutely. Like, it's funny because, you know, when you grow up, I don't know at school when you learn about nutrition, in the protein section, it was just meat and eggs and dairy, wasn't it?
Yeah. But they've
And
forgotten all the other, it's like they've forgotten where the animals get their protein from.
yeah, totally, exactly. And what's really lovely to see is the Eat Well guide from the government was recently updated in the last couple of years. And in that section where it was once, chicken and ham and beef and eggs, now it's actually actively telling people to choose beans and lentils first above those types of foods, and it's recognizing that plant foods are also high in protein and they're good sources of protein.
Yeah,
So
it's wonderful
yeah,
because I think where a lot of people got confused is where dietary guidelines talks about quality proteins, and people would think, oh, that means that meat is a better quality, but you have to look at
yeah,
your protein package, don't you? So when you're eating a
totally.
plant protein, you're getting fiber, insoluble and soluble fiber. You're getting other phytonutrients, and you're not getting some of the things that you might otherwise get from certain animal proteins alongside the protein. So new 5GC is one of the toxins that you can get. You could get a lot of heme iron, which can oxidize, which therefore has increased risk of things like cancer, which is why processed and red meats are classed as definitely and probably cancer causing by the World Health Organization. So it's quite interesting to look at the protein package overall. Not to say that one thing is bad and one thing is good, but just to say, well, actually, let's look at the balance of what you're getting from each thing. And if you look at the list of what you're getting from a plant protein, it's generally very positive. If you get a list of all the things you're getting from animal protein, then you've got a mixture of positives and negatives.
Mm. And it's interesting talking about animal proteins as well, that a lot of people massively overeat in terms of the amount of recommended animal protein per day anyway. So I remember learning about this in dietetics and being really, really shocked that actually you should only have a portion of meat that's the size of your palm once a day, max. That's it. Or a piece of fish the size of your hand once a day, max, and that's it. It's either one or the other. So there's, a lot of people who aren't vegan are really, really eating probably way too much animal products, way too much animal protein, and they're way overshooting what they should be getting anyway.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it's I think that's another reason why we sort of think that vegans can't get enough protein, because I actually think that the day-to-day person probably eats way, way, way above and beyond what they should be having.
They
So there's that
do. They
conception.
have a fiber deficiency. That's the thing we always talk about, is the fact that people worry about protein deficiency when they should be worried about a fiber deficiency. We should be having at least 30 grams of fiber a day. Paleolithic man is thought to have had up to 150 grams a day, but we're getting more like 15 grams a day, which is just minuscule. And it's no wonder that we're getting things like diverticulosis, diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, constipation. And then when you're constipated, you end up recycling unwanted toxins and hormones that you're trying to poop out because they're just staying there in the colon to be reabsorbed, as well as unwanted cholesterol that your body has made. So actually, yeah, we're fiber deficient rather than protein deficient on the whole. So it's good to be plant-based from that perspective, because you're almost guaranteed to get more fiber on a plant-based diet.
And absolutely, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition advised 30 grams a day. And if you're plant-based, that's so easy. You don't even have to think about it. But if you're not plant-based, and a lot of your proteins are coming from animal sources, you're missing all those opportunities for all that additional fiber. I mean, legumes are packed full of fiber. So for a vegan, if you're choosing chickpeas instead of chicken, there's all that extra fiber that you're getting that if you were choosing the animal product, so yeah, I think fiber is massively underrated, and that's exactly why the advisory board went from 18 grams a day recommendation all the way up to 30, because they could see the protective effect that it has for health. So yeah,
And we haven't even
absolutely.
talked about the microbiome, have we? And how fiber feeds your good gut bugs as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's so many things that fiber can do.
There's so much emerging research, isn't there, on the gut microbiome, and we're seeing more and more that it's so important, and it's linked to more things than we ever thought it could be linked to. So absolutely, and your gut microbiome can change dramatically depending on your diet. So if you are eating a diet rich in fiber, you will, in theory, have a much healthier gut microbiome.
So win.
So yeah, I feel like we could talk about the gut microbiome as like its own live almost.
We
Like there's
could.
just so much to talk about.
I
It's
know,
crazy.
but we've already been talking about this. Oh, crikey, the time's going so fast. I've just seen it. We've been talking for 7 minutes already.
Oh, blimey. Okay, right. So I can't find the poo question, which is crazy. So
If from recollection, I think it was to ask about babies and poop.
yes,
It was a baby poop question, and the lady was asking whether it's normal for neonates, little babies, not to poop very often. Is that
yes, it's
something like
something
that?
like yeah. So like the baby hadn't pooed for say 10 days, but it's from what I could tell, they were weeing okay, they were having lots of wet nappies, that type of thing. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about poo, Gemma? Is that okay?
It is. It's fine. I think newborn babies, they've got very tricky poo situations. I have to be honest with you. Most of the time, especially for breastfed babies, they actually produce quite a lot more poo, and it's quite runny, and it's often quite yellow, and it looks quite seedy. And often it doesn't really smell of very much, so it's not like what you'd expect normal poo to be. It's
Yeah.
very runny, very yellow, very seedy, and you think, what is this? But it's actually normal for a breastfed baby to have that kind of poo. If your baby is not pooing, that's also quite a common problem. And generally, babies that are bottle fed tend to suffer from constipation more often than breastfed babies. But your baby might not actually be constipated, especially if it's in the first 28 days of their birth. It could just be that they are taking all the nutrients from the breast milk and they're not really excreting very much from the wee or the poo. So you could get regular wee coming into the nappy, nice and soft and full, but the poo itself isn't coming out, and you think there's something wrong or they're constipated. Well, it may not actually be that they're constipated. It could just be that they're not producing that much yet in their gut in terms of waste. That being said, if it's more than a few days, I would seek the opinion of a healthcare professional, either your GP or a midwife, or perhaps a health visitor. More often than not, in the first 28 days, you will expect some follow-up from your midwife. And very rarely it could be something that's a medical condition, like a partial Hirschsprung's disease, where the reflex to poo is not quite there. That's very, very rare though, and so it's something that the midwife might want to exclude if your baby hasn't done a poo for a very, very long time, so maybe up to 2 weeks. But you should seek some help, or at least an opinion, if it's been more than a few days. But most of the time it's not a problem. So just to reassure you of that. In fact, I myself, my youngest son, he didn't poop for quite a long time in the first month, and I was absolutely beside myself, thinking that there was something terribly wrong. But there was nothing wrong. It was just, he wasn't constipated. He just hadn't pooped, and that was okay. And he was fully breastfed as well. So these things are very variable.
And infant poo is there's such a wide variety of normal, isn't there? Like on the opposite end, my little one, pooed constantly. It felt like it was just, multiple nappies every day. But that was what was normal for her. And then I have friends again who their babies pooed like once every 5 days, and that was just normal for them. So yeah, like I said, it's like there's quite a wide variance, isn't there, really?
And somebody's just posted that they have a 3-year-old that poops like an adult. Is that normal? I think probably yes. It shows that they're having nice bulky stools, which is important. So many kids in the paediatric clinics have got constipation, and that's not great. Sets you up for all sorts of problems. So yeah, so she's pooping regularly and nice big poos. That's great.
And you find, don't you, when babies start weaning about 6 months, they do that their poo does become a bit more solid and it becomes a bit more formed.
Yeah.
And the first few months they're like, oh, what was this? I'm going through that right now with my little one. Every so often she's a bit like, oh, what's this coming out my bum? Because she's been so used to loose ones up until this point. Anyway, right.
Shall we move on to other topics?
Okay, but we do the poo one. I'm a dietitian, we like to talk about poo. This is a question. Okay, so first of all, there's been loads of questions about supplements, so we'll talk about that at some point. But here's another question I see so much, and it's about allergy. And the question is about, there's been a couple, so I'll sort of summarize the ones that I've seen. Basically, should we be introducing animal products to children? Because as we know, milk and eggs are common allergens that can occur in childhood. And I've seen a lot of people who are worried that because they're vegan, they're not introducing those allergens. So, should they? Even though they're vegan, should they? What's your opinion on this, Gemma? What do you think? What I think.
Well, I can give you mine, then you can do yours. So basically, I think it depends. If you don't have a strong family history of allergy, then I wouldn't think of it as too much of a problem. But if you yourself suffer from severe eczema, asthma, or you yourself have had food allergies, or your partner, then it's something to consider. Because when your child has an early exposure to a potential allergen, it means that the research suggests, at least, that they're less likely to then develop an allergy to that product. But it's a bit mixed. So I have read some research that suggests that if you expose babies to cow's milk proteins early on in life, for those who are genetically susceptible, there is some evidence that it could cause them to develop type 1 diabetes later in life. There's been a strong correlation between exposure to cow's milk proteins, only in those with those HLA genes, those specific genes that make them more susceptible to autoimmunity. So that would be something to think about in terms of, rather than specific allergy, more to do with autoimmunity and susceptibility to autoimmune conditions. But otherwise, generally speaking, the evidence shows that if you expose a child early, they're less likely to develop an allergy. So, yeah, I think if you yourself have a family history, then it might be worth considering exposure, even if that's something that you wouldn't necessarily eat yourself, just in terms of safety, really. So say that they, as an adult, decided to eat an animal product, or maybe in their childhood became exposed to an animal product without realizing. It would be awful if they developed a sudden allergy to it and you didn't know that that was something that could happen. That being said, I can understand why, if you have an ethical reason not to feed your children certain products, then you wouldn't want to do that. So there's no straight answer. I think it depends on how strongly you feel. But I think from a medical standpoint, if there's a strong family history of a specific allergy, it's probably worth exposing them at a young age to reduce the risk that they'll have the same allergy, as a basic kind of synopsis.
Yeah. And I guess I'd say probably most people out there don't have a family history of allergies, they don't have eczema themselves. And what we do know is that, generally speaking, cow's milk protein allergies and egg allergies, children do tend to grow out of them, don't they?
Yeah.
So if you're someone that doesn't have a strong family history, you don't have eczema yourself, there's no reason for you to believe that they would be allergic. There is no real reason to give those foods, really, unless the ones that you've stated, Gemma. There seems to be a big push in America for mums to do this, but I think in the UK, in terms of introducing allergens, there's lots of other allergens in the vegan diet that you'll be reintroducing to your children, such as soya and nuts, for instance. Yeah,
exactly. And the research again is suggesting that the earlier the better for those foods. In fact, I think, let me just have a look, because I think I did see, I've got something here that might be quite interesting. Okay, so there's a study, the Learning Early About Peanut Allergy study, or LEAP study, and it was conducted here in the UK, and it was a prospective randomized control trial that assessed 640 high-risk infants, and they decided to either give them early exposure to nuts, peanuts, or late exposure, so sort of between 4 to 10 months of age, or after 3 years of age, to see what happens. And what they found was that in infants who had been given the nuts early, there was 1.9% of them that developed a peanut allergy. 1.9%. For those who were given the peanuts after the age of 3, remember, these are high-risk infants, which means that their relatives probably had a severe peanut allergy, for example. The ones who were exposed much later, about 3 years of age, it was 14% of them developed a severe peanut allergy. So the
Wow.
difference was quite dramatic. A difference between 1.9 and 14%.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
huge, isn't it?
I know, it's a
That's
big
really huge.
difference. And you know, the plant-based health professionals UK, they have actually just released some guidance on weaning and your cat
There's the cat.
weaning and when to expose a child to nuts specifically as well. And the
Yeah.
guidance is clear that you can give things like nut butter as long as the child themselves hasn't had an allergic reaction to that food. The earlier the better.
And I think we had a question about when would you start actively giving the nuts or the other allergens. Like it's from 6 months, really, isn't it? The
It
current
is.
guidance
It used to be.
is
It used to be. Guidance used to be that delaying it was seemed to be instinctively better, but studies have definitively shown us that that's actually the other way round. The earlier you can expose them, basically when you're weaning, the better.
and allergy is one of those fields that just moves so fast, doesn't it? And the advice changes, it seems, all the time sometimes for allergy. Um, but yeah, at the moment, we say you should be weaning your children at about 6 months, no earlier than that. So I guess it would be 6 months, wouldn't it? That would be
It
the
would.
earliest you could.
Yeah, it
Okay.
would. I mean, people used to say between 4 and 6 months, but the guidance from the UK is clear that 6 months is when we're supposed to start weaning. And
Absolutely. That's when we feel the gut's mature enough to start handling solid foods, isn't it?
yeah, and that's a phase that you've done far more recently because I'm sure you've been doing all sorts of, finger foods and. Well, what did you decide to start with purees for Robin, or was it all kind of baby-led weaning a bit later on?
We did baby led weaning, and I was a bit worried. The first few spoonfuls were like Weetabix, so I was a bit, I need something soft. But we did baby led weaning. So messy, so messy.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it was really, really good. And we made sure that she was able to sit independently and that she was able to hold her head up independently as well. Those are the two of the main things you need to look for if you're going to do baby led weaning. But yeah, no, it's been a great experience. We decided not to introduce any allergens because there's no family history of allergy at all with us, and I don't have anything like eczema. There's no reason for us to believe that she would be allergic, and we started with nut butter almost immediately as well. That was one of the first things she had on toast actually was peanut butter. And if you are a little bit worried, you can always start with really small amounts, can't you? And just sit and see.
yeah.
So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Did you do purees or baby led weaning? What was it you did with your guys?
I just did a bit of both, to be honest.
Yeah.
There was a lot of kind of camp. So I remember even back then, a few years back, it was, are you going to do this or are you going to do that? And I ended up just doing both. I started. It was more instinctive in a sense. Like with my oldest child, he was holding his head upright. He was interested in what I was eating, and so I would just give him mushed up versions of what I was eating, basically, and that worked out fine. There's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure around what you're going to make and what you're going to do, but actually, whether you're raising your child vegan or not, the first foods that you give a weaning baby are pretty much the same. Like you're not going to give them a big hulk of steak, even if you're omnivorous. You just don't do that.
True.
So babies
Yeah.
will actually, for the most part, eat pretty much the same as what you would have otherwise given them anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very, very true. So should we try another question?
Let's do this.
All right. So again, lots of supplementation questions. So here's one I'm going to read out. Advice: resupplementation needed for a 14-month-old toddler who still breastfeeds. And that was one of many questions. There seems to be a lot of questions about supplements between the ages of 1 and 2. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this, and obviously Gemma, come in if you want to add any bits and pieces. So generally, just to talk about supplementation in the UK and what's advised, the Department of Health say that every child 5 years and under should have a vitamin D supplement of 10 micrograms, whether you're vegan or not. This is just something we advise everybody. From 6 months of age, Abidec is the multivitamin of choice that the government suggests that we should be giving our children. And it contains vitamin A, some B vitamins, vitamin C, and vitamin D. It doesn't contain B12 though, so just bear that in mind. And then, of course, from 2 years onwards, you've got the Veg 1 supplement from the Vegan Society that you can use. And there's also loads of like multivitamin gummies that are vegan friendly from 3 onwards. But we have this weird gap in between 1 and 2 where people generally are struggling to find multivitamins. Now, this is a really common question when I've seen vegan children for dietetic appointments. And basically what I'd say is that generally speaking, if you're taking enough of those plant milks, so the 2 that we recommend for vegan children at the moment would be the Alpro Growing Up Milk and the Oatly Whole or the Oatly Barista. And this is for a few reasons. It's because they've got the correct amount of calories, but they're also supplemented with B12, vitamin D, calcium, and iodine. Okay, so those are 4 really important nutrients. Now, just 2 glasses of either of those milks a day, so that's 150 mils twice a day, that will meet the RNI for B12, for iodine, and for calcium.
Amazing.
So you've already got it in the bag just for 2 glasses of those milks. And then obviously you would be then giving other foods that are maybe fortified with B12 on top of that, and that are calcium rich as well. If you're still breastfeeding, as long as mum is well supplemented and she's not deficient, then there should be enough B12 in her breast milk. There should be enough iodine in her breast milk as well. And if you're using formula and you're having 500 mils a day of formula or more, then again, you will be meeting those RNIs for those nutrients. So basically, I think the reason why there's this bit of this weird gap between 1 and 2 is because actually plant milks or breast milk are still quite a predominant part of your diet. And theoretically, if you're having a relatively wide diet and you're utilizing those types of things, you probably don't need to be thinking about a supplement. Having said that, I've seen other health professionals around the globe recommend B12 sprays after 1 year, iodine drops, that kind of thing. I think it's a case of looking at what your child is taking in, and if you feel like there's a nutritional gap, maybe seeking some advice from someone, maybe a dietitian through your GP, or getting in touch with a health professional in some other way, just to kind of check that you're happy with their diet. So yeah, omega-3 was one.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I would say, again, as you said, vitamin D is the one that especially breastfeeding women are strongly advised to supplement. Because the breast, but interestingly, with breastfed babies, the government advice, I think, is that they should also receive a vitamin D supplement, because
so that's all children, regardless of whether they're breastfed or not, they should all have that vitamin D, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I think some people don't realise, so that's something that's great to share with you guys. But yeah, I mean, I personally would give my children Veg 1 in half, or I use another one. I mean, obviously, I'm not affiliated with any brand in this conversation, but I tend to, my boys, they love Vegums or Vegums, which is just this chewy gummy bear, which has it's got B12, iodine, selenium, and a form of vitamin D, which, you know, is obviously something that they love. I give them omega-3 EPA DHA supplements as well. So, I mean, you don't have to do that. You can get plenty of short-chain omega-3s from flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts. But again, it really depends on what your child is eating and if they're particularly fussy. And also, some people, the evidence is slightly mixed. You know, some people are not very good at converting the omega-3s from plant foods into the long ones that you might get from fish. Having said that, there's no study evidence that I've read that people who are vegetarian, for example, who don't tend to eat fish either, you know, have any particular issues with their EPA or DHA levels in the brain. But it's a theoretical risk. So if it's something that you're concerned about, then you can give them a ready-made EPA DHA supplement. So I do that just because why not? You know, I have the ability to do so, so I'm happy to do it. So I give there's a liquid one. I think it's made by a company called Vivo. Again, I don't have any affiliation with them. I just I just know that it's a good product. I give that to my youngest one because he doesn't like the capsules. But my oldest son, he's 8 now, and he's happy with capsules. So I give him an EPA DHA capsule each day as
Yeah,
well.
that's good. And yeah, with those capsules, you can also, I've heard of people bursting them and putting them onto food to sort of give younger children if they need to. And if you're going to be using things like flax seeds and chia seeds, I'd recommend soaking them first because they can draw in quite a lot of water. So I wonder if you're giving quite a lot of unsoaked chia seeds, for instance, to a young baby or a young child, it might actually constipate them, perhaps, potentially. So they're very high fiber, aren't they, really, flax seeds and chia seeds? Um, but yeah, as you said, it's I think for most people, if you were to have, so for adults, it's a tablespoon of flaxseed and chia seeds. So I'd say go for half a tablespoon for children. And really, the amount of short chain ALAs, the amount of short chain omegas in those foods, taken into consideration the conversion rate, which can be quite poor, in theory, that amount should give you the correct amount of omegas in the long chain version, absolutely. So there's quite a nice wide variety of different options out there, isn't there, for supplements? And
There
it's easier
are.
than ever. Like,
But I was going to say, most of the thing I want to emphasize, I'm sure you do as well. Really, if we can, we should get our kids to have like the vast majority of the nutrients through actual foods.
yes,
If you have a really fussy kid, then that's something that you're going to have to work on, which we can talk about as part of the live. But generally speaking, if you get them to have a nice mixture of fruits and vegetables and grains and beans, then they'll definitely be getting the vast majority of all the nutrients they need from those healthy foods. But yeah, it's nice to have that backup, especially for the B12. It's nice to know that that you've got that covered. But I almost forgot to say, with my 2 sons, I have given them chia seeds and flax seeds every single day in their morning porridge, or in their pancakes that we make, every day. So it's something that's so easy to incorporate. You don't even have to think about it if you get into a routine. And some kids like to have it mixed into like a yogurt, a non-dairy yogurt, for example, which is
mhm.
another easy way of doing it. But like you say, if you can soak them first, then even better.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can make chia puddings, can't you, for instance? So even as like a nice part of the meal could be a chia pudding. You can be really inventive with it. You put it into banana breads, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's great. I don't know about you, but I find being vegan, I'm so much more inventive with what I'm cooking. And
Yeah.
just I make such a wide variety of lovely things now, which I didn't do before I was vegan.
No,
So
it's
it's
lovely,
great.
isn't it? Oh, and also I have got this to show you, which is quite a fun
Okay.
book. The Help Yourself Cookbook for Kids.
Oh,
It's
that's
just
really
fun.
cool.
Yeah, it's mostly finger foods and ideas to make kale interesting. But
Awesome.
it's just nice to have a cookbook that's kind of aimed at kids, and it's just sort of friendly. It's giving you like ideas to make things like cheesy sauces and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's one that I've got at home. But there's loads of them out there now. It's fantastic. So much choice.
Well, I think we did have a few questions about fussy eating actually. So we'll talk about that. I'm just trying to look at the comments as well. It's so hard. Like if anyone here's done a live, trying to read the comments and trying to like answer questions, it's actually really tricky. So I'm trying my best. We did have a question saying about is it enough for a breastfeeding mum just to be taking a general vegan multivitamin? Um, I personally sourced a multivitamin for pregnancy and lactation because when you're supporting the growth of an infant, not only do you need minerals for yourself, you also then need to pass those nutrients onto your child. And so naturally, your stores are going to become depleted. So you actually need to aim for higher than the usual RNI for a number of different vitamins. So I would say a general vegan multivitamin probably isn't enough if you're pregnant and lactating. You should probably try and find a vegan friendly pregnancy and lactation supplement. Definitely.
Good tip. Oh,
Okay.
we've got somebody from Mexico here. Hi,
Have
Ed.
we?
Yeah, we've got. Let's see. Yeah, who else? So many people. All
I
right,
know.
let's
I
see. So,
can't
so we've
believe
got.
how many people are here.
Let me go through some of these. So we've got a question about soy.
Yeah.
Is soy good for you? Is soy bad for you? If you make a
Okay.
start on that one, I will look for the next question.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so there's a lot of misinformation about soya. The British Dietetic Association, the British Nutrition Foundation, both have said that soya is absolutely safe. There is nothing to worry about. A lot of the scaremongering comes about these phytoestrogens. Actually, phytoestrogens are thought to be protective. I believe they're thought to be protective against some breast cancers. They're also really handy. A lot of women who are going through menopause, they report that soy actually really helps with their menopausal symptoms. Um, and really, actually, soy is, I think soy is a fantastic food. Not only is it really versatile, you can make so many things with tofu. You can make so many things with soy products. It's also a complete amino acid, so it has all 9 essential amino acids in it. It's got loads of fiber in it as well. So, for instance, a massive benefit to, say, soy milk versus milk from cows is that actually it contains fiber as well. Cow's milk doesn't. So soy is
And again,
fantastic.
and also, as you mentioned before, for kids, it's the most nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk in terms of the protein content as well. So it's a brilliant
Absolutely.
thing. I mean, and if you eat tempeh, that's even more fantastic because it's slightly less processed, really healthy for you. And as Sam said, you know, there are certain receptors in the body for phytoestrogens, but this is actually a really good thing because it tends to bind preferentially to beta receptors in the body, which are more prevalent in bone. And so what that means is if you have more soy products, it actually is potentially strengthening to your bone. And conversely, it's less likely to bind to the alpha receptors, which tend to be in places like the breast and the womb, which means that it's known as a selective estrogen receptor modulator, or a SERM, which is really useful because it actually, as Sam said, reduces the risk of breast cancer, reduces the risk of uterine sort of womb lining abnormal growth. So not only does it reduce your risk of these cancers, but it actually improves your bone mineral density as well. There was one study I read where women who were around the menopause were either split into a control group, or a group that had a glass of soy milk a day, or a group that was given a progestogen cream to take to rub on their skin. And what they found was that in the control group, their bone mineral density went down, as you would expect over time in the perimenopausal group of women that they were studying. But with the progesterone cream, it was great news because the bone mineral density didn't go down. But when the women were given a glass of soy milk to drink a day, their bone mineral density actually improved. So, I mean, this is just one small study, but it just goes to show that there's actually, you know, a lot of evidence out there in terms of population data that soy products are really good for reducing long-term cancer risk. And yeah, nutritionally complete in terms of their amino acid profile, as Sam said. So they're brilliant. If you're worried about phytoestrogens, the food that naturally contains the most is actually hops. And you use hops to make beer. So when a guy has man boobs, it's not because of any tofu or tempeh he's been eating, it's because of the beer that he's been drinking, basically. So that's something to to consider if you're going to be worried about it. But getting back to kids, you know, tofu is a brilliant source of protein, and it's certainly nothing
Yeah.
like beer. Edamame beans, amazing. So yeah, crack on.
One of my little one's favourite is things is actually a fake egg and crust mayo sandwich. So I basically I use firm tofu, I mash it up with some butter beans, give it a little bit of a mash, add a little bit of mustard, just a tiny bit of mustard, a little bit of vegan mayo, tiny bit of pepper, and I pop that into some sandwiches, and she absolutely loves it. And it's great. It's such an amazing source of calcium because tofu is set with either nagari, which is a traditional setting agent, or it's set with calcium, like I think calcium sulfide or calcium something like that, a calcium setting agent, and that means that actually tofu is a really fantastic source of calcium. And we know that calcium is one of those micronutrients that people do worry about in a vegan diet. But we know that actually if you have a varied diet and if you eat good rich sources of calcium, then you will meet those quite easily, really.
And
So it's
that's
not.
another thing to try and get your kids to have more of is the cruciferous vegetables, because they're usually
Yeah.
jam-packed with calcium that the kids can actually absorb really well. especially things like broccoli. So if you can make broccoli trees into something fun, then you're really onto a winner.
Totally.
But if not, tahini is fantastic. You can drizzle
Yes,
that on
yeah.
all sorts of things, and it's packed full of calcium. And most kids quite like tahini, so that's another great tip if you're curious to get more calcium into your little ones.
Well, seeing as we're talking about getting foods into little ones, I have another question about fussy eating. So we have a 2-year-old boy, extremely fussy eater. Do you have any tips for getting more veg into him?
Yeah,
So,
it's a tough one, isn't it? I think my
what
my
do you?
my biggest tip in terms of my own experience is persistence. I try not to make too big a deal out of it. I make them what I'm going to make them, and this has always been the case, even from when they were little. And if they decide not to eat it, then that's their choice, and they're allowed
Mhm.
to decide not to eat something. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to put it on their plate anymore. So I keep putting things on
It's
their
so right.
plate. I think when they're between the ages of 1 and 2, it's actually quite nice because they're generally not that fussy.
Mhm.
But around the age of 2, 3, 4, they can get really super fussy, especially if they have certain
Yeah.
conditions like autism, for example. That's going to be even more tricky because they'll have certain set routines and textures that they like. So it's important to get really creative, but not to allow stress to play out too much. And it's really difficult because I know from personal experience how I would get really anxious if I felt that my children were not eating, and I would worry that they weren't getting enough. But kids are actually pretty good at self-regulating, um, and they're also quite stubborn, so they the chances are that you're probably going to give in before they do. So
Yeah.
try not to put too much stress around it. Eat together if you can as a family. Everybody eats the same if you can. And
Mhm.
I used to basically say like a 1 bite rule. I don't need to do that so much now, but I'd say, look, if you haven't tried something before, then you just have 1 bite. And then if you don't want it, you don't have to eat the rest. But I will still, on another day, put it on their plate and keep putting it on their plate. So, for example, my youngest son, he had a real aversion to mashed potato for a long time.
Mhm.
He just didn't really like it, which was a travesty because we'd always make this amazing lentil shepherd's pie, which like my oldest son really likes. But I just kept on putting it on his plate, and now I'm thinking, yeah, a year and a half later, he eats it without fuss. He just eats it. So
There we go. You know,
it
so
took a
much.
while.
Yeah, so much of what you said is absolutely spot on. I see lots and lots of fussy eaters in my pediatric clinics. It's one of those things. It's a really common problem, and actually, for most children, it's just part of their normal growth and development when it comes to their relationship with food, and it's something that can be very anxiety inducing for parents because you're thinking, oh my God, my child's not eating enough. And often what we put down for them, what we think is what they should be eating, is often way off. There's been times you put a meal down for your kid and they've had a couple of bites, they're like, I don't really want any more, and you're there thinking, blimey. But there's other times where you feed them a plate of food and they want more and they want more and they want more snacks and they want more this, and you're thinking, how can you possibly still be hungry? So, like you said, children are really good at self-regulating. They're really good at listening to their own fullness cues, their own hunger cues, and that's something as adults that we're not very good at doing actually. But children are fantastic at doing it. And like you said, the number one thing I advise people in clinic is to reduce those anxiety levels and to make meal times relaxing, make them fun, make them enjoyable, and actually focusing on the things they do eat and they will eat is a really good thing to do, thinking positively about it rather than thinking that they don't have this and they don't have this. And what can be really useful is thinking, okay, well, what protein foods do they eat? And what carbohydrate foods do they eat? And what iron rich foods do they eat? And what calcium rich foods do they eat? And actually, when you start looking at it like that, you realize that 9 times out of 10, they are actually getting all of those nutrients in one way or another. And like you said, exposure, exposure, exposure. Just because they've turned their nose up a bit at once, it doesn't matter. Just keep giving those foods, keep making them part of their world, and they will eventually come round because,
It takes a while
oh
to
my,
find they do.
It does. It really does. It really does. It's not something that will resolve overnight. And if you've got a child that's particularly picky, and even just putting new foods on side plates, for instance, can be a really nice way of saying, okay, well, this is what we're having for dinner tonight, and feel free if you want to explore it. And actually, over time, once everything's nice and relaxed, children actually think, okay, I might try a little bit of that, or oh, that looks a bit interesting. So totally on the same page. Like, just keep things relaxed, keep things calm, keep offering, and they will eventually come round. And of course, this is why we're so lucky we've got supplements. If you are a bit concerned that there's something they're missing, you can always look to a multivitamin to kind of, serve as a bit of a safety net while they're going through a bit of a fussy period. So we're quite lucky in that respect. Go to a GP if you're particularly worried, and you can always get a consultation with a dietitian, and we'd be more than happy to go through your diet plan and see if there is anything missing or lacking, which is all available in our wonderful NHS.
It's amazing.
Thank God.
That's really amazing. Yeah. So I suppose sort of circling back round to kids and what they eat in general, some parents who decide to have a vegan lifestyle will advocate for raw veganism, but that's something that for children, my general advice would be to avoid that, just because fruits and vegetables, they're incredible, they're so phytonutrient rich, they've got loads of antioxidants and fiber, which is great. But when kids have got these small stomachs and they want to go and play, they might not always be getting the right amounts of all the different nutrients that they need if you're just giving them these very watery, fiber rich foods. So absolutely. My suggestion would be to not be afraid of fats for children. Absolutely, they can have things like nut butters and seed butters and nuts and seeds as they get older, and avocados. Did you say? I think you just said avocados, didn't you? Yeah, and even things like mixing in. If you're worried that they're not taking in enough calories, you could even add in stuff like extra virgin olive oils and stuff like that. Like, you don't need to worry or think, I must only give them fruits and vegetables. Please do give them a nice variety of all sorts of whole foods, not just fruits and veg.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, kids need calories. While it's great to try and strive for that 5 a day, let's be honest, most children probably don't get that. But what is the most important thing for their growth is calories. And that is found in those starchy carbohydrates, and it's found in those healthy fats as well. So absolutely, like you said, don't be, raw veganism for children. I'm with you. Like, it's a no-no for me as well. I just don't see how with their small stomachs they could get all the calories that they need. And I think that's also why sometimes when kids, all they want to do is eat the pasta and they leave the vegetables, maybe that's their body telling them, I need to prioritize these calorie dense foods instead of the veggies. And, sort of going back to the question, how can I get them to eat more veggies? To be honest, when I make sort of a tomato sauce, I tend to cut up a lot of veggies in there anyway. So even before I had Robin, my tomato sauce included carrots and celery and courgettes and all these types of things cooked down, and sometimes I blended it to smooth and sometimes I didn't. And I love adding lentils to those types of dishes as well. It's a really good way of thickening the sauce and adding a bit more nutrition. So there's nothing wrong with putting vegetables in sauces. Mac and cheese, for instance, vegan mac and cheese.
That's my favorite secret vegetable sauce.
Yeah, totally. The amount of secret veg you can get into that, like, you can put, make it out of cashews, so it's full of protein and good fats, and then, add a butternut squash in there, or some sweet potato
and
onion,
all sorts of stuff I put in my mac and cheese.
And like, broccoli. The amount of times I put broccoli in like a macaroni cheese bake and it's cooked down, it's like been sort of steamed first. It's cooked down and kind of mulched into the sauce, and it's been like gobbled right up and not even, batter of an eyelid that it's a bit of broccoli.
Oh, I've got a top tip about broccoli as well. If you
Oh
are
yeah.
given, if you're given cooked broccoli, a lovely tip is to chop up your broccoli about 40 minutes before you cook it, if you can remember to do that. It's not essential,
Okay.
but it's called the hack and hold technique. And what's so great about that is that it allows the enzymes that are released when the cell walls are cut down to mix with certain compounds in the broccoli to release sulforaphane, which is a really important nutrient that you can get from these cruciferous vegetables. And if that enzyme is killed off by heating, then you can't get it. But you can get it if you chop them up first and then leave the broccoli for about 40 minutes before you cook it. That's just a little tip.
Oh my God. Okay. That's awesome. I'm going to
Yeah,
start doing that.
yeah, the hack and hold. Brilliant.
Do you know if it's the same for things like kale and spring greens and that kind of thing? Same sort of thing?
Any cruciferous vegetable, and yeah, it's the sulforaphane that you need. And the myrosinase enzyme is deactivated with heat, but you need that enzyme reaction. So if you're eating it raw and you're crunching it in your mouth and then you swallow it, that enzymic process happens automatically. But if you're cooking
Wicked.
it first, then yeah, just leaving it chopped up for 40 minutes first, and then you've got the sulforaphane all there ready for you to enjoy.
That's amazing. Great tip. Really good tip.
Cool.
Love it.
Yeah.
I just, do you know what's quite funny? Okay, so I said, sorry, had a screaming baby, just wanted to see if you already answered about whether vegan babies poop less often.
Don't worry, we spent the first 15 minutes of the live talking about baby poop.
So you'll have to go back to the beginning of the live
So you're
and
going to watch
rewatch
it later.
it. You
Yeah,
can.
we've only got
Okay,
3 minutes. We've got 3 minutes left. Let me just have a look.
line.
Yeah, we talked about calcium. Oh, can you please discuss conflicting research regarding lectins? Easy peasy. There is no scientific research on lectins because it's not a real problem. There's one study somewhere where somebody got sick from eating raw kidney beans. That's pretty much the only thing I could find in the scientific literature on the negative effects of lectins. There's one book written by somebody who talked about lectins being something that is damaging to human health, but he forgets that actually many of the most long-lived populations eat a variety of pulses and don't have any health problems, and that when you're cooking pulses and legumes, then you cook them, right? You don't have them raw. So yeah, I mean that's a very kind of very brief explanation about how I don't consider lectins to be a problem for human health. I don't know what you, if you want to add something to that, Sam.
No, that was perfect. Absolutely perfect.
I
I'm
think
just thinking, have we got time for another question or should we
let's
wrap things
see.
up?
Yeah, they've talked about milk. Yeah, we've talked about that. Oh yeah, so there's one quick question about non-dairy drinking children shorter than dairy drinking children because of IGF-1. Is that true? So that's really interesting. There was one study that I found from the 1980s on vegan children, which did show that on average they had a very slightly shorter stature, but this was a 13-year study from a time, a long time ago now. And it could actually be that excess IGF-1 is not necessarily a good thing. We know that IGF-1 has a strong association with increased cancer risk. So yeah, as far as I know, more recent studies have not shown that to be true. I don't know what if you know anything more about that, Sam.
The only things I've heard about that is that when they talked about stunted growth, they're literally maybe talking about a centimetre or two difference as well. So we're not looking at like, wow, you're quite significantly shorter. But also, like you said, if it is IGF, one that's sort of driving this, and we're not really meant to be drinking cow's milk, really, is it just the case that those people that aren't on dairy are just growing to their actual predicted healthy height? And
Yeah,
the people
we
who are,
just don't know exactly.
yeah,
And also with regard to periods and when your child starts their periods, nowadays premature precocious puberty is happening more and more, whereas actually young girls, our girl children should not be starting their periods necessarily as early as they are. And it could well be that they're having excess hormones, IGF-1 and things like that from meat and dairy that they wouldn't have had so much exposure to in years gone by. So yeah, I think overall IGF-1 is not necessarily a good thing to be having lots and lots of, because we make enough of it. It's the Goldilocks hormone. You don't want too much, you don't want too little. Our bodies make exactly the right amount of the hormones that we need. In fact, there's a population in Ecuador called the Laron population who can't make
Gemma,
IGF-1, and they're
we
really
have got
short. So
seconds remaining.
that's
I'm
it.
so sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much for joining me.